In this video, we're going to use React and Next.js to create a quick chat app on top of OpenAI's Chat-GPT API. The app is going to allow users to type a question into a form, which will get submitted to a backend endpoint. Our backend code will then instruct Chat-GPT to respond with a certain tone and format. This pattern could be used to create whatever kind of experience you want on top of Chat-GPT. This is a mid-beginner tutorial. It's for someone who's just getting started with React and Next.js and using external APIs. We're going to cover every single step from getting your API key, starting a new Next.js app, wiring up the API, and doing a tiny bit of styling. This is like a full mini little project. Now, if you've been doing this for a while and maybe you're familiar with React and Next.js and you just want to get to the Chat-GPT part, there are time jumps in the description. So feel free to browse around as needed. Before we get started, please be sure to hit like and subscribe on the video for more videos like this one. If you get stuck, we have a Discord community of other very friendly developers, and that's all linked below for you in the description. Hope to see you in there. So to absolutely get started, we want to make sure we go to platform.openai.com/API-keys. This is how we're going to get an API key from OpenAI, the organization that manages Chat-GPT. You'll need to be logged into your account to see this page. Here you have some UI for generating secret keys. See, I created this one today. You just hit this button, you can name it whatever you want, and then generate one. It'll appear here. Now, the secret key is secret. You should not share it with anybody. That goes for this API, of course, but also most other APIs you use. You never want to share your secret key. The secret key is like your identity. We're going to give it to the API, and that's how it knows that you are asking for it. It's also tied to your billing and usage kind of numbers. So it's important that only you use it. Don't share it with anybody else. Now, once you create one of these keys, you're going to want to immediately copy it to your clipboard. You won't be able to see it again after this. Now, I'm going to tell you straight, this API does take money to use. I believe they do give out free credits time to time, so it's worth researching. You don't necessarily have to just drop money right away like I did. I think when you sign up, they might give you some free ones. If you have any tips about getting free credits, please leave them in the comments below for everybody else. And it's very reasonable. I put 20 bucks into it earlier today, and I've been using it all day and not even really made a dent in it. But please, if possible, try not to let the paywall dissuade you from trying this out. Now we have our API key. It's time to set up a new Next.js app. So per the instructions on the Next.js website, we're going to run this command here. It's worth noting that you need Node installed on your computer. That's a little bit outside the scope of this video, but there's a link in the description for you if you need help getting started with that. When you run this command, Next is going to ask you a couple questions. I'm going to name this Try Chat-GPT API. So for this video, I'm going just JavaScript, no TypeScript today, no ESLint, no Tailwind. I will use the source directory. Yes to the new app router, just because it's the future of how everything's going to work going forward, and no need to customize the default import. Now we can open this project in our IDE of choice. I've opened the project up in my IDE. I'm using WebStorm today, but you can use VS Code or whatever you like to use. It won't matter. This is the out-of-the-box Next.js install, but I have made a couple changes, so let's take a look. First, in the app directory, the page.js, I've gutted. So we have our home React component. I've removed all the content here and just left it to this main tag. I've also gone into the styles that are imported. If I open that up, you can see it's totally empty. One last thing, I went into the global style sheet and cleared that out as well. Next.js comes with a bunch of styles out of the box, but I didn't want any of those, so I just deleted them all. Now we're ready to build this thing. So first we're going to make an endpoint in our Next.js app that's going to go ahead and talk to the Chat-GPT API. And to get that going, we're just going to start with like a really basic button. You click the button, it's going to hit the API, and then we'll fill it out from there. So I'll start with a button that says hit API. We'll give it a click handler. Now, in the new world of Next.js, anytime we have interactivity, like clicking or user events, that kind of thing, we need to make sure we mark our component as a client component. So at the top of the file, I'll just go ahead and say use client as a string there. Now the error is gone and we have our button, cool. Now we need to create the endpoint in our project that this button is going to hit. And so to do that, I'll go to our source directory. Within app there, I'm going to make a new directory and we're going to call it API. And now we want to name our new endpoint and we're going to name it something real clever, real simple, just chat-GPT. And now in the new world of Next.js with the new app style directory, to make an API endpoint, we want to go ahead and create a new JavaScript file in here, or TypeScript, whatever you're using. And it's got to be called route.your extension, so JS in our case. Now our front end is going to be able to hit this endpoint by hitting API/chat-GPT. So in this file, let's go ahead and export an async function. And this is going to respond to post requests. So we want to use capital POST for post. This is a Next.js thing that takes in a request. And for starters, we're just going to return some dummy data. Soon everything will be flowing, but we just want to get everything wired up here. So I'm going to return a new next response. If I start typing, the autocomplete will suggest it. So I'll hit tab and that will import the file fine. From there, we want to do .json, and then we'll just pass some dummy data to return. So name, it works. This will go away in a second. So moving back to the front end side, let's find our button. And in our click handler, we want to go ahead and hit that API. So we're going to reach for the fetch API of the browser. So I'm going to start by marking this function as async. We'll say const the response is going to be equal to fetch. Here we pass in our API endpoint. So like we said, that's /API/Chat-GPT. Again, it just matches these file names exactly. That's how the routing works in Next. API Chat-GPT. Now we want to be sending up a post request because we used post as the function name here. And so to do that with the browser fetch API, we need to go ahead and just add some more configuration. So as a second argument here, I'm going to start a new object. In there, I'll say method is post, just like that. We want to go ahead and pass up some headers. And for that, we'll use content-type application/JSON. Now this might seem like a lot of magic, like where are you pulling these things from? After you do this a couple times and get used to the fetch API, you get used to filling this stuff out. So it's just practice. Anyway, next we want to send up some data to the API, and we're going to fill this out a little bit more in a bit, but for now I'll just say json.stringify, and then some dummy data here. Now we're going to build out a tiny little interactive app that's going to allow the user to type something in, and whatever they type in is going to end up going up to the API, and that data will live in here. But for now, we'll just leave it like this until we're ready for that kind of thing. Okay, now we'll just log out our response just to make sure we get back something that we expect. And of course, we're using async here, so we should mark this fetch call as await. That way the code will go ahead and do this step, and then when it's done, this console log will happen. Now, if I spindle open the browser dev tools and go over to the network tab, you can see when I click the button, we hit our Chat-GPT endpoint, and I have it filtered to fetch XHR, just for the record, if you don't see what I see. But in the response, we get back, it works, which is the same thing that we've hard-coded over here. So now we know that the front end is talking to the back end. Now we can actually get Chat-GPT involved. OpenAI actually has a nice Node SDK that we can use to sort of package up all of the interaction with their API for us. That makes it nice and easy to use. So we're going to install that package into our project. So I'll open up the terminal here and say npm install just OpenAI, just like that. This is going to bring in their package from npm. Close that. At the top of our route API endpoint, we want to go ahead and bring in that library. So I'll say import OpenAI from OpenAI. Next, within our function, we're going to go ahead and create one of these OpenAI clients. That's going to give us a nice way to provide all of our information to their API, and then we don't have to worry about it so much. So I'll say const OpenAI. That's going to be like a new instance of new OpenAI. And here we need to pass some configuration. So I'll open the function call, new object. It wants us to provide an API key, and we know all about that now. This is our unique API key. Now, often when working with applications like this, you could just paste in your API key right here, and that would technically work. There are some security risks with that. Say this file accidentally goes up to version control or someone else gets a hold of it. They could then have access to your key, which is attached to your billing, which is just bad news. We really want to keep this file just being functionality and have nothing to do with our credentials or anything like that. So we're going to keep our key in a different private file. At the root of our directory here, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file called .env. And Next.js knows how to handle this. We want to create a new variable in here called OpenAI underscore API underscore key. The name of it doesn't actually matter. I'm arbitrarily naming it right here. This is just a convention I found in their documentation, so I feel like it makes sense to follow that. Then we'll say equal new string. Here's where we want to paste in our OpenAI API key. Now, if you remember this screen on OpenAI's website, this is where you grab your secret key. You're only able to copy it when you create it, so you'll need to create a new one, just name it example, and then copy it right from here. Now, if you've set up an env file before, this is probably all old news, boring to you. For anybody that's totally new to this, I'm going to demonstrate how to make sure the string is actually flowing all the way through just by using this placeholder value. So for a demonstration, I'm just going to say banana right now. Now we want to grab the left side here. So OpenAI key, whatever that is, we'll go back into our API endpoint file. And instead of having a hard-coded string here, we can replace this with process.env. This is going to dynamically pull values from that file. We can say dot and then paste in that exact variable name. And we can even see if we console log it here, just to make sure it's all wired up. A lot of little steps here, but every little step you take along the way, make sure everything is wired up and working. Now, anytime you change your env file, you want to go ahead and pull up your server where Next.js is running. You want to shut it off and then restart it. That's going to refresh the files. And we'll even see a line here that says loaded env from this file path. Furthermore, since I'm logging out that value, if I go to the browser here and hit the button, we hit our endpoint and we can see that it logs out the key value. So in your case, you should see your key. I just see the stub banana. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and fix that. At this point, I'm going to bring in my real API key. So I've pasted in my secret key here. I'm hiding it in the editing so nobody steals all my credits. And I'll go back to our route file and restart the server to make sure everything is flowing. Okay, and now with all that set up in place, we can actually start using this thing. So I want to start typing await OpenAI.chat completions create. And we'll save whatever we get back from this as response. So response is going to be equal to that. Now we want to pass in some configuration. So for this demo, we're going to use GPT 3.5 Turbo. Again, as you get more advanced, you can swap out this model with other models. The real interaction here and the real value here is the next field, and that's going to be messages. Messages is actually what we're going to send to Chat-GPT, and that's going to influence what we get back. And so I'll start with just one object here, role as system, and this is going to be how we can kind of like set the tone of the response that we get back. Now for starters, I thought it'd be fun to do something like this. We can seed it with instructions like, you're very grumpy. Please answer my questions with sarcasm, grumpiness, and anger. Now next we want to pass it the actual prompt that we want to ask it. So for that, we're going to say our role is user because we are the person asking it something. Content. Here is where we can go ahead and pass in whatever the front end sends us. So we'll have a little text box. You can ask it whatever question you want. That question is going to flow through to the API and live here eventually. But for now, just to get it working, let's go ahead and hard code this. My channel is usually about video game development. So what's the greatest video game of all time? How was it made? Now, finally, we need to finish up our configuration with just a few default options. We're going to have a temperature of 0, max tokens of 1024, top P is 1, and then frequency and presence penalty, both is 0. Again, these are just default values. You can play with them as you wish. Now, when our API endpoint responds to the front end, we're currently hard coding this it works message. Instead, we can just grab whatever response we get back from Chat-GPT and plop it right here. Now, if I reload over here, we'll hit that button again. And you can see this request is going to take a little bit longer than usual because it's actually going out and interacting with Chat-GPT. Let's pull up the response and see that we got a lot of stuff back. If we spindle through all these things, let me try to make it more readable for you. You can see we get back this choices list, and in there it's got some messages, and then we see we got some text back. So this is actually from the AI bot. It looks like it is being a little sarcastic, so that part's working fine. Let's go ahead and plop this onto the screen so we can read it better as a user. I'll go back to our front end code, page.js. We want to create a little new piece of React state to hold whatever response we get back. That's how we're going to be able to render it to the screen. Now, generally speaking, in a real production project, we'd probably break this out into smaller components and that kind of thing. We'll do a little bit of that in a second, but for now, I'm just going to put it at the top level home here. So the list we get back is called choices. So we're going to use choices as the value name and then set choices for the React state setter. We'll reach for use state there. And we can just default it to an empty array. When we get a response back, we can go ahead and use this setter to populate our state. That will force the whole component to re-render, and then we can start listing those things out on the screen. So first we want to grab our response and turn it into JSON. And then from there, we can go ahead and set our choices. That's going to be results.response.choices. Now under our button here, let's go ahead and render out any choice answers that we got back. So we'll say choices.map to turn each choice into a React component. From there, we're iterating through them all. So we'll grab which one we're iterating through and turn that into a paragraph tag. So that's going to be paragraph. The content of the paragraph is going to be choice.message.content. Again, looking at the network tab, you can see choices here. Here's the first one we're iterating through, number 0. It has message block in there, and then content is that string. There's also some other data here that you could visualize if you want. For our demo, this is going to be enough. Now in React, anytime you're creating a dynamic list like this, you need to make sure you give every top level element a key. And lucky for us, the API response comes with a unique index per choice. So we can just say choice.index, and that'll be a nice unique value. If you don't do that part, you might see a warning in your console with React complaining at you. Okay, my bad. In testing that, I realized maybe you caught this. If you did, leave a comment. We need to await response first. This little bit is asynchronous, and then we actually don't need this middle response. It's just result.choices. Clean that up a bit. Okay, now over here, I'm gonna go ahead and hit the API button. It takes a bit, but each choice we get back does render to the screen, and we can read it. You see it's already pretty salty. It didn't really give me an answer, but that's pretty subjective, so that's okay. Now, instead of having this hard-coded question that's baked into the backend, let's go ahead and create some UI so that the user can actually type in whatever they want. Now, to get this kind of thing wired up, I like to work backwards sometimes. So starting from the back end, we're going to replace everything with little dynamic segments. So first, in our API endpoint, kind of towards the top, we're going to go ahead and get our post data that's coming in from the front end. So to do that, we can await request.json. On that, we're going to have a params.prompt, and that's going to be the string that the user passes in. So we can go ahead and take this line, and then in our hard-coded part here, we'll replace that. So this is grabbing the user's input. This is passing it to Chat-GPT API. Now, granted, in a real production project, we want to do like error handling and maybe some input validation and that kind of thing. But for the sake of this demo, this is fine. Now, in order for this to work right, we need to make sure that we're passing in a prompt to our post request. So we'll go back to our front end, find our body in our fetch request, and instead of this mock thing that we left before, the prompt will come from here. And now we can create some front-end UI to make sure that this string comes from the actual user. So I'm gonna go into our project under the source directory. I'll make a new directory called components. Make a new file called promptform.js. We'll make a new React component with that same name. This is gonna be a form tag. We'll go ahead and make a little onSubmit handler here. First thing we want to do is actually cancel out of the browser's default behavior, because this is going to be like a Ajax-y kind of call. Stub this out for a second. We're going to pass in a callback to this component, so whenever the form is submitted, that callback will fire with whatever value was entered into the form. We'll see that working in a second. So we'll make a label, input with type text. And we want to make sure this is a controlled component. So we're going to go ahead and give it a value. And the value should be a little piece of local React state. So again, we'll reach for use state. We'll have prompt and set prompt. It's going to be use state from React. We can just start it as an empty string. We'll make sure that value always matches whatever prompt is. And then anytime you change the input, we'll use our onChange handler, grab that event, and pass the new value, e.target.value, into set prompt here. Finally, we want a nice submit button. So we'll do that here. And I'll go back to our page.js, and we want to plop this component on the page. So right under hello, I'll just start typing prompt form, hit tab, and that'll import it. Now we see our prompt appearing. I'm going to take like 2 seconds to style this up a little bit nicer. First, we'll have a better headline. Chat-GPT is thrilled to see. In our prompt form, I'll go ahead and reach for styled CSS modules to kind of give us some nicer styles here. So right next door, I'm creating a new file called promptform.module.css. Again, prompt form just matches the component it's intended for. Little convention. Pasting in some styles here. It's nothing crazy, just a little bit of a max width on the form. And then we're going to make sure that this input is display block and has a little bit nicer text styles. Nothing crazy, just want to make it look a little bit nicer. Back in prompt form, we'll import our styles. Again, right from next door. On our form, we'll reach for class name, plopping in that styles.form. You can see the autocomplete kind of already picks up on those classes that we created. And then we'll do the same thing for the input here. Styles.input. Now under the hood, I have Prettier installed to help us clean up this formatting a little bit. So I'll go ahead and run it through Prettier like that. Everything's the same. It's just kind of like indented a little bit nicer. While we're on the styling kick here, we can just go back to page.js. By default, we have this page module CSS that came with the default Next.js setup. We'll open that up. We'll give a paragraph class, just a nice little width. Make sure that's wired up. Class name styles.p. Cool. Now it's still obviously not very beautiful, but it looks like a little bit nicer to me, I think. Now at this point, we want to take whatever input is asked, like what is the best video game ever? And we want to make sure that this string gets used as the prompt. So this fake hit API button can basically go away now. It's already served its purpose for us. So I'm going to go back to prompt form.js, and in the props here, we're going to accept an onSubmit callback. So basically, whenever we submit, we want to go ahead and clear out the prompt. So we can go ahead and set the prompt back to empty, and then we'll call our callback, passing in whatever prompt is when it's called. And then finally, we just want a tiny bit of front-end validation here just to make sure that we get some kind of value. Of course, this could be fleshed out a little bit more, but I'll just say if prompt is equal to an empty string, we just want to go ahead and return, don't do anything. Now, when we render out this component and page, we want to make sure that we are passing an onSubmit callback here. So we'll say onSubmit. All of that code that used to live in our button click can go ahead and move to this form submit callback. So we'll make sure this is async and just grab all of these lines and move them up into that callback. Then we can get rid of our old button. So same idea, it's just the submit to the API is now coming from the form submit. And now remember, in the submit callback, we go ahead and pass up whatever the current value of prompt is to that submit callback. So this is going to be whatever string is entered into the input. We can go to page and we'll receive that right here. Prompt is a string. And so here, instead of passing a hard-coded string to the API endpoint, we can get rid of this. And it basically becomes this, prompt is prompt. And then because of JavaScript syntax magic, we can just shorten it so it looks like that. So let's go ahead and ask it something. How was Link's Awakening made? Okay, we get quite a bit of a sarcastic response from it. I was expecting a little bit more about Link's Awakening there, but no big deal. Now I did notice it kind of takes a long time for this response to come back. You know, the chatbot's doing a lot of work under the hood. Let's go ahead and add just a little bit of UX niceness to this. So in our page, we're going to create a isLoading piece of state. That way we can, and let's make sure that it starts as false. That way we can disable the form while it's actually working. It's just a nice little way to communicate that something's happening and we shouldn't resubmit. So when we start working here on submit, we'll go ahead and set isLoading to true. And then whenever we get anything back, we'll go ahead and set it to false. Again, real production project, probably want some error handling and that kind of thing in here, but this is fine for now. We'll go to isLoading, grab that, and we'll pass it into our form itself. So in our prompt form, we want to pass in the current state. Is it loading or not? We'll receive that as a prompt. And then in the form, we can go ahead and find our input type submit tag and just say, hey, it's disabled if we're loading. Now I'll ask it something, how's your day going? And we should see the form disable while it's working, and then it'll re-enable when it's ready for us to resubmit. So boom, it's disabled. And we get our response. Okay, now I'm starting to get a little bit sick of its snark, and I think we should change its tone. So if we go to route.js, the API endpoint, remember here, give us some more room, we're seeding it with this like, you're grumpy, please be grumpy kind of thing. Let's change that. So how about instead of being grumpy, you're thrilled to be talking to me. Please respond like we're old friends and haven't spoken in years. And by the way, I'm not like an expert prompt engineer, not even close to it. There's a ton you can do to be like, hey, whatever you give me, make sure you format it in a certain way, like format it like data or have this really consistent response. That's how you can use this stuff to build real apps, real products, leveraging Chat-GPT as your backend. And they want you to do this stuff. That's why the API exists. So definitely go crazy with this. But for our demo, let's just flip the tone here and just say, you're thrilled to be talking to me. I want to be friends. I'll go ahead and ask something else. So how about what is the greatest video game of all time? Let's see how the tone changes now. Oh, cool. So it even gives me a Zelda-themed answer. That's kind of neat. I didn't really expect that to happen because we're sending it all new history. But good to know, Ocarina of Time, probably one of the greatest games ever. And see, its tone is really happy and friendly. Now, of course, I'm just asking it silly like questions here that aren't that useful, but you can use this kind of thing to ask real stuff. Like, please give me a JavaScript string, but reversed. And so I'm not formatting the output correctly here. We could format it as Markdown to make these code snippets nice. But it did go out and give me like a real solution. Like here's a function to reverse the string, and here's how you do it. And it also seeds it with very friendly tone, which is nice. If only more programmers were like that, right? Now, finally, we want to quickly style this up to just look a little bit nicer. It's kind of rough around the edges right now, so let's just fix it up. First, I'm going to go to globals.css, which we previously totally cleared out. I'm going to go ahead and paste in some styles here. We're just setting border box for the box sizing on all elements, stretching out the HTML body length because we're going to add a gradient background, and then we'll have a little bit of a padding border around the whole frame. Here's that in place. Next, let's hop over to our form. So we have that prompt form module.css. I'm going to swap out our input styles with just a couple new rules, basically just changing some of the colors and sizing and border radius. We're going to get rid of our form rule. Now everything's kind of stretching out to match its container. Two new blocks coming in for our submit button to make that a little bit nicer. We have this new class called submit button and then a disabled state for that too. So let's hop over to our template, or our component rather. So that's prompt form.js. In our input type submit, we can go ahead and add that class name. So styles.submit button. And then since we deleted our form class, we can just get rid of this. Okay, this is coming together. Now we want to put this whole interface in a nice kind of like contained card kind of background. So we'll go to our page module.css and add a class for that. I'm going to add in two new blocks here. One is a style block for the card class itself. So it has a white background, some spacing, a max width, nice little subtle box shadow. And then we're also going to house the response paragraphs from Chat-GPT in this nice kind of like gray background. Just makes it feel a little bit more intentional. Let's go ahead and use these. So I'll grab our card class, go to our page.js, and we want to wrap everything that we have here, everything inside this main tag in a new div. So here it is. And that class name is going to be our styles.card. So there's our container. I'm just going to go ahead and move this bottom div tag all the way to the bottom right before that main tag closes. There it is. I'll hit save. All right, and now everything is housed in there. That's starting to look a lot nicer already. Finally, instead of this styles.p class that we used before, let's go ahead and pop in that response class, which again, just kind of adds some background and some nicer spacing. Let's test this out. Nice, and now the app feels a little bit more real. Now, I left this in kind of friendly mode. I was thinking a nice challenge to you, if you're up for it, would be to add something to the UI that could tell the bot what kind of personality to use. Maybe there's a toggle for like friendly or grumpy. That could go up in the API call and then kind of influence which seed is getting used here. That's a great next step in adding your own personality and features to this. Please be sure to hit the like button on this video if you got some value out of this, and subscribe for more videos about app development and game development. Check out my list of full courses on my website. It's linked below, and I hope to see you in our Discord server, especially if you're creating something cool with AI. I want to hear about it. So thanks again. I'll catch you next time.